Welcome, all you happily miserable accursed. We've got Scott Reid in his Zoom square. We've got Christy Clark in her Zoom square. I'm here in mine. All three of us, through the power of technology, but even more so through the power of mutual respect, common courtesy, and actual rule of law, protected from physically slapping the shit out of each other when we disagree with something that the other has said. Despite the fact that
Herle.
I'm a big vessel of love.
Herle, hey.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, okay? Keep my friend Christy's name out of your fucking mouth. Do you hear me, motherfucker? Keep it out of your fucking mouth. I will.
God, it was a Cretchant joke, for God's sake, Jesus.
Oh, I know. Oh.
So good. All right. We don't need to talk about that, do we? It was pretty funny.
I think we have to talk about it. It's all I'm interested in talking about.
Yeah, I know. My initial response was kind of, wow, a man who stands up for his woman. And then I know, it's terrible, isn't it? I know.
If I said that, people would slap me.
Oh, I know. Well, and I slapped myself. And then I thought, wait a minute, because then their kid comes out and says, hey, that's the way we do it.
Right.
Really?
Oh, nice
that's
example.
how you do it at home? Really? I mean, it was terrible. And it was an assault, and it was in public, and it was just the ultimate privilege, a guy thinking, oh, I can do whatever I want, wherever I am, doesn't matter. It's awful. I hope they don't invite him back.
Chris Rock, though, impressed me.
Yeah,
he just stood there, knew it was coming, took it, and like an athlete, flowed with it. I mean, he didn't even lose his balance or anything. Chris Rock, very impressive. Continues to impress me.
It was awesome. And immediately, right? He's got the rejoinder, right? Yeah. My God, Will Smith just slapped the shit out of me, right? Perfect. He said what we're all thinking, and but yeah, it was cool. I also thought, by the way, there was a little fear in Chris Rock, right? Will Smith, not a small dude. And then when he says, keep my wife's name out of your fucking mouth, he's like, dude, it was a joke. And he goes, no, I'm telling you, keep my wife's name out of your fucking mouth. What's the second thing? The second time it goes around, what's Chris Rock say? He goes, dude, I will. Lesson learned. I'll let the Academy police this. We're on to best documentary.
Yeah. And, but Chris Rock's a comedian, right? Those guys, they're used to being heckled. And you got the feeling it's not the first time Chris Rock's been punched. That was the other part of it. I just thought it was terrible. And Questlove, he did this fantastic documentary. I don't know if you guys have seen it, Summer of Soul. And it was just like, nobody cares. Nobody noticed.
I know. It was a bad timing for that. Very sad. I kind of like Howard Stern's comment on this, which is that if the joke had been uttered by Jason Momoa or Dwayne The Rock Johnson, you'd have seen what a little bitch Will Smith is.
That's right. Let's just toxic up the masculinity on this whole thing. All I can tell you is I've been in Chris Rock's shoes. I've been the guy who's like, I'm just trying to be funny. I don't know why everyone's so mad. What's that guy doing coming over toward me? Oh shit. That's a bad feeling. It's a bad feeling.
All right, we got a lot to talk about this week. We're going to do a little coda on our conversation last week about the NDP Liberal deal.
I got that joke.
The one that I took a metaphorical slapping for here on the Twitter machine. That will bring us to our cursed clipping this week. Susan Delacourt's inside story in the Toronto Star about how the deal came to pass. We want to talk about Alberta and Jason Kenney's frankly bizarre machinations in advance of the leadership review vote. Back to Ontario, where there's finally a new childcare deal in place with the feds. And if there's time, we might get to Joe Biden and not let this man stay in power. We'll end with our hey yous because that's what we always do. Christy, Scott, how are you guys today?
Fantastic. Great to be here, David and Scott.
I'm swell.
Are you fantastic, Scott?
I wouldn't say fantastic. I'm half of that. I'm just fan. I'm not tastic. I'm fantastic. Looking toward it. What do you got? Oh my God, you're literally fantastic.
Yeah.
Literally fantastic.
Did I read that this week was the anniversary of Yellow Brick Road being released?
No, it's the 75th birthday. That's what you've been hearing.
That's what it is. Okay, right.
Yeah. There we go. Elton John's 75th birthday. Got to light the candles. Okay, so A week after our last pod, I think we all got some reaction to the last pod. Either of you have any thoughts in reflection a week later about the whole thing?
I'll start. We've been doing this pod for quite a while now. At least, I don't know, whatever it's been, 2-3 years. I mean, I think, without the benefit of technology, and I've been doing it since 1988, David. And I have to be honest. I think it was the most pronounced set of responses I've ever received. I got a lot of anger from liberals. I got a lot of anger from New Democrats because, if just to, kind of maybe thumbnail it, if fundamentally you and I were questioning, David, and maybe all three of us were questioning the whether there are unpleasant consequences and implications down the road for the Liberal Party, and about the brand blurring, and about the potential for tugging out of the center, and what the distinctions remain between the NDP and the Liberals. And we were flagging that concern. I got a lot of anger. I got people saying, "Hey, what about dental care is good. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You should be in support of this stuff." Or the center has moved. You are just an old man. And you don't. A lot of old man. Hey, old man, right? Clear the bench. New people want to sit down and catch the next bus. So fuck on off. A lot of that. And, that's all fair. I mean, you put stuff out there and people respond. But it was, I got a lot of that. And then some angry New Democrats. Some New Democrats who are like, I kind of like shit you say about people I hate sometimes. So, I've been kind of with you a little bit. But now, man, now, I'm not with you. And so I got a lot of pushback. And I did get a minority of opinion from folks going, hey, glad to hear you guys saying that. So I was surprised by the reaction. I was surprised by the intensity and volume of response I got.
I got a lot of response too. And, here's where I differ from you guys, I think. And from, I've been a lifelong federal Liberal, but I'm not a member of the party anymore because
can't be one.
Huh?
Can't be one.
You can't, there are no members of the party anymore?
Supporters.
Oh, okay, great. It's a movement. That's right. I forgot. Yeah. So that solves my problem. Saves me money, right? If I ever wanted to join.
Get that $5.
But this is where I differ from you guys, is that this leftward drift of the party, to me, is not, this is a confirmation of something that happened a long time ago with the Liberals. The Liberals left me a long time ago. And so I don't really I just see this as confirmation of something that's already happened. It's not shocking. The Liberals have moved on to take over the NDP world, I understand that when Justin and Jerry were plotting their way back into politics, one of their options was, do we take over the NDP or do we take over the Liberals? Well, they took over the Liberals won, and then they just moved the Liberals into the NDP lane. So I don't see, to me, the kind of the feedback that I got was pretty positive on it, but I do think Scott is quite right that people just think that this idea that we should care about the economy, that we should care about the deficit and job creation and economic growth, the oil sands succeeding and all that stuff, that's just old people talking. We don't worry about it. The money's going to grow on trees, just like it always has.
Yeah, I had it reconfirmed. I got a lot of responses. I would say most of them negative. I would say it was reconfirmed for me that people care more about outcomes than process. And so the notion of what might happen to the Liberal Party some years down the road as a consequence of this is not nearly as important to people as getting a dental care program was. And that's not surprising to me. And the second thing I think is how much the absolute hatred/fear of the right, which is, I think, much greater now than it used to be, is coloring people's perceptions about how much they care about distinctions other than the right. They just want the right to be defeated and kept out of power, and they don't much care how that's accomplished.
I was struck by the number of people that were unconcerned about whether our concern was valid. So as you say, there were a number of people who said, no, I like this. I like this for a whole pile of reasons. But then there was also a category of persons who said, you know what, I don't, if it allows us to throw down and to have elections that are us versus them, and we feel like the us, even though that us is Liberal NDP, whatever, even a merger, we're not troubled by that as long as that means that we're bigger than them and we stop them. So I was, and that's a rational stand. That's people are entitled to that point of view. That was rational. I was interested in it though. The other thing I want to ask you, David, I got a lot of pushback from people saying, look, the center has moved and you guys haven't moved with it. That's what the real problem is. You guys define the center as something that no longer exists. It's moved heavily to the left and you guys haven't caught on to that. You're a public opinion researcher. You are more attuned to that than nearly anyone I know. So my question to you, David, is, has the center moved? Because on the one hand, I look at that and I go, well, maybe they're right. I'm not so certain I'm always correct about everything. But if they're right, then I don't know what that means. Has everything changed? But maybe they're wrong and the center hasn't moved. That's just an excuse people use for saying, no, I'm justified in making whatever choices I want.
Well, listen, the center moves and evolves all the time. And there's no question about that. And, the center is not where it was in the 1990s when we were crafting budgets, Scott. There's no question about that. One of the dramatic areas, like when I was talking to the Provincial Liberal Caucus back in 2017 about a $15 minimum wage, and some people were worried about how that was too left-wing and that wasn't Liberal policy, that was NDP policy, that type of thing. I said, hey, a $15 minimum wage is supported by 40% of the women currently intending to vote Conservative. So is that a left-wing issue? No, that's become a centrist issue. And a lot of those issues around, for instance, the gig economy and precarious work, people have become a lot more attuned to that, and they're interested in how they can support those people. But it also makes them interested in where good jobs are going to come from. And it has always been important to the success of the Liberal Party that it have an economic anchor and be seen as the job and wealth creators. When Kathleen Wynne won in 2014, she was not only considered the person most likely to expand the social safety net, she was also considered the most likely person to create jobs. It was an important part of the balance. I think the center always includes economics for people. In fact, the economy is ground zero for people. Yeah. And if you're seen to be disinterested in that, or if you're seen to be not focused on the economy as it affects people, jobs, inflation, these kinds of things, then you're not going to be able to just do it on the left side of the equation. Not if you're trying to get the kind of votes the Liberal Party's historically gotten. Mm-hmm. It's not a 40% proposition.
Yeah. And I think that, we shouldn't ignore too the changing demographics of the country. People who come to this country from elsewhere are a lot more interested in growing opportunities for themselves and their families. And that means they are thinking about jobs. They're thinking about lower taxes. They're thinking about, kind of how they can create something for themselves out of really nothing if they're coming here from places around the world sometimes. So that, that changing demographic, I think, David, that your analysis is totally spot on when you're thinking about white suburban Canadians, comfortable, kids going to university, that group of people for sure, especially amongst women. But I think immigrant voters, this is where you start to see those Doug Ford, Justin Trudeau switch voters. Those folks feel very differently about the economic agenda. And certainly in Western Canada, we see it differently as well. So, for me, the Liberal Party is the party. If you want to lead, what you're saying is, look, we care about the social issues. And it's not doctrinaire right-wing crazy to say, gee, we shouldn't have a $350 billion deficit. We shouldn't be adding another $50-60 billion in spending when we're already at the highest per capita spending we've ever had as a country. I mean, that's not nuts. Although I think there is that group of white suburban voters, many of them women, who actually do nowadays think that sounds a little doctrinaire and a little too right-wing.
Can I just, a last thought I have on this, I'm going to pick up on something you said, go back to the example you used, David, because I think it circles something that matters to me. You mentioned, some people, the response to a higher minimum wage was, oh my gosh, that's taking us too far. I remember that. I was around for those discussions and those debates in caucus and cabinet in the premier's office. And he really encountered a lot of that. Some people I really knew and respected were going, we're getting the balance out of whack. But your point about it appealing to 40% of conservative women and therefore it not being a left or right issue, it also highlights something else, which is there was an inherent ambition in the Liberal Party, the Ontario Liberal Party at that point, right, to capture votes wherever possible in a transparently opportunistic, that's part of our mission way, from the Conservatives, right? Like, are there votes to be had there? And one of the things I worry about with this deal is, does that impulse drift? We're no longer trying to capture any. Those are just saying, well, what votes are there to be harvested? Instead, we're simply, let's isolate those votes that are there, isolate those votes, make certain that they remain in the minority so that we can beat them at the polls. And I just think one of the ways to secure a better, broader set of governing principles once you win power is to be also thinking about, how do I poach votes from those guys so that it's, so that it is a quote unquote
I think it's linked, Scott. I think it's linked with something else we've talked about on this pod, which is the trend in political communications and political organizing to be about counting the heads of the people who currently support you and making sure they're motivated to get out to vote, rather than persuading people who are not currently supporting you to support you.
Do you remember the days when Mr. Chrétien, Mr. Martin would talk proudly about how they'd elected MPs in every single part of the country, how they were representing rural and urban and all that stuff? That was the politics of, we're going to try and appeal across the spectrum. And now what we're seeing as a result of this change that both of you just talked about, is we're seeing political parties are the federal Liberals are quite happy to represent no one except people in urban communities in British Columbia, like highly urban communities. And they are equally happy to represent no one in the rest of Western Canada, pretty much. That isn't
almost literally no one.
Literally. And that's what happens when you decide, gee, I'm only going to speak to the people who already want to hear from me, rather than thinking about how I can represent all Canadians.
Well, I think that's interesting. I don't know if that's entirely fair. I might quarrel with that slightly in this respect. I don't know that they're happy. I don't know that they're content with that. I don't know if that's the limit of their ambition. I remember when, people like me were wondering, this whole podcast, we're proving everybody's point, right? Do you remember this? Do you remember that? Can you get that bowl off the top shelf for me? I don't like getting on ladders anymore. But I remember when, in 2015 and in the lead up to 2015, there was an explicit articulation of a 338 strategy on the part of Team Trudeau, that they were going to campaign and place resources in ridings where they knew they would not win, but they were looking at the example of the Democrats, where the Democrats are trying to bust out of the limits that they had built for themselves in the U.S. and campaign and build infrastructure in those ridings, if not for this election and 3 elections down the road. And that was an explicit part of their mentality and their vocal strategy, or the strategy that they verbalized. And I can remember people questioning that, including myself, going, is that right? Is that smart? Is that an inefficient use of resources?
Absolutely. But they were very determined about Alberta, and I was extremely skeptical about Alberta. They were right. They were ambitious about Alberta, and they got seats in Alberta.
And I don't think that they're happy to not represent those places. I think that incumbency has created, combined with how you win elections now and this over-reliance, in my view, on these micro-targeting strategies, I think that they've come to a place, it's not so much that they're happy to not have representation there, I think they've almost resigned themselves to that. And I think maybe the limits of that political approach, where they start to say, well, how do we bust out of 31? You and I, David, we've been talking for 2 years about, well, let's get out of 31, 32. Let's try to compete for 38, 39. I wonder if in part they're saying, guys, you haven't actually caught the wave here. You haven't realized you can't get there. So what you need to do is you need to add another party to your coalition your voter coalition, in order to build up that 6, 7, 8%. Because we're not going to get there by trying to name a lawn chair committee person assigned chair committee person in Athabasca.
The problem with that strategy, though, too, it's true. The Liberals they're eating the NDP. It's just the NDP are suckers in this for sure. The Liberals are going to get credit for everything good that happens, and the NDP are going to pay the price for everything bad that happens that they don't get done. So that's, in that respect, on the, in the big picture, it looks good. But when you actually drill down on that, a lot of those New Democrat voters are switch voters. They're people that are happy to vote conservative. They want to talk about income inequality. They want to talk about wages. They want to talk about jobs and the economy. I mean, this is that working people coalition that's always been the building block of the New Democrats. They are not going to be delighted about the outcome of, about this coalition, because the NDP and the Liberals have both stopped talking about those issues. I think does, part of what it does is it opens up a lane for the Conservatives. We talked about how the Conservatives can, kind of open up and go to the middle. The Conservatives can also talk to working class voters now, and nobody else is going to be doing that.
Throw up a hand if, during the past couple of years, you've had a doctor's appointment virtually. It's a lot of us. There's been no other choice, really. We all know why. Well, a virtual check-in with your doctor during a pandemic is one thing. Having an MRI or CT scan come to you, or being monitored for a condition in real time by a specialist who's in one place while you're at home, is another. All of these things are coming, hurly-burlyites, with the continuing evolution of 5G and 5G-enabled healthcare technology. And it's a key reason our presenting sponsor, TELUS, believes getting 5G wireless connectivity right across all of Canada, not just our biggest cities, but all rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, is critical to delivering public health care in a way that's equitable for all Canadians. This is Chapter 10 in our 5G story. Healthcare is a shared Canadian value, eh? Simply put, shared means we all have something in common, and practically speaking, that everyone has access to it. Well, with these innovations coming down the line, and other technologies that impact health and public safety, think about fully connected ambulances that pre-treat remotely, with multi-layer diagnostic imaging on board, connected to emergency room doctors, so they can develop a proper treatment plan before the patient even arrives. Access to 5G is critical. Just one problem. Only 37% of rural Canada has any kind of high-speed connectivity at all. Nothing equitable or shared about that. The sad fact is, too many carriers are failing to build networks in rural communities, putting a big kink in our healthcare delivery chain. But TELUS is building, and they're fighting for policies that accelerate rural builds. Because, as a technology company with social purpose, TELUS knows the faster we get 5G to everyone in Canada, the more equitable our healthcare system becomes. We're going to wrap up this whole story next week, but you can have your say right now at telus.com/get5G-right. Are you watching this fucking Poilievre campaign?
I wanted to talk about that at some point.
Are you watching it? He is drawing big crowds.
Yep.
At all times of the day, 10 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Parking lot at 7:30 in the morning. People are stopping off their coffee. 650
big crowds.
people.
I've seen clips of a charade event in Quebec and a Brown event in Quebec, and they both looked like leadership campaign events to me, where you'd labored mightily for several weeks and you'd drawn a couple of hundred people into a room to listen to something. And charades was from all across Quebec. And he had a few hundred people. I don't mean to diminish it, but Poilievre's getting like 1,200 people a stop. London, Brampton, Windsor, wherever I'm going, whatever time of day it is, there's hundreds and hundreds of people that are showing up. Now, crowd turnout is not an indication of support. It is more of an indication of intensity of support than it is of breadth of support. So it may be that he's got a small group of people incredibly wound up, but boy, in terms of winning a leadership, I don't see even that. That doesn't look like a contest right now.
Is part of that intensity kind of the tail of the truckers convoy? Because, there were a lot of people who watched the truckers convoy and, they were mad about it and thought it was terrible. And, what are you doing being anti-COVID and all that stuff? But they were mad about Trudeau saying, your views are unacceptable to me. Talking about them as though they were kind of some foreign weird influence in our country. And there was kind of I felt amongst kind of regular people were offended that the government wasn't listening to these Canadians, and particularly lower income people, working people felt like there was, they felt a little slapped around by all that. And I do think outside of the anti-COVID group, there are a bunch of people who were motivated by that. Just regular working people who do drive trucks to work every day. They're just, they drive trucks and they got their booster shot. They're still mad.
I don't think it's the tail of it. I think it's the trunk of it. I think it's the big, wide midsection of it. Like, I don't think, because tail implies that, well, it's on the last little bit of it we're going to see. I think that, this is the formula for a populist grievance politics play, right? Yeah, you will find people who feel aggrieved. And, I tend to think that people, like, my counsel to Trudeau would be, strike a posture that's less superior, that's less, hey, if you want to be good, be like me. But I also think that people exaggerated that comment, exaggerated its political significance. Nevertheless, it is intensity of support, right? We can't conclude from those crowds that he's got an overwhelming movement and it carries you into majority parliamentary territory. But we certainly can conclude that among those people that are paying attention, there is an intensity and a goddamn right reaction, a head nodding, a mug thumping, fucking A.
I want to go out of my house and go to a building and yell my support for this.
Yeah,
that's right.
But but don't forget that Canada has a strong strain of populism. I mean,
sure.
we're a country where we really don't have very much in common, which is why it's important we have centrists and people talking about what we have in common, which we haven't had in the Prime Minister's office for a long time. And, you think about Western Canada, it's not just Alberta, it's Quebec, there are people, and it's rural Ontario. People are populists in this country, and populism has just we've had leaders who've kept the top on populism for a long time. And I think this is the sad result of having a prime minister who's been a divider for a long time, and someone who hasn't really cared about speaking about the things that we have in common, the way that we've gotten used to and gotten comfortable with.
Yeah,
I'm going to give a shout out to our colleague in this enterprise, Jenny Byrne, because that Poilievre campaign looks fucking buttoned down. It makes no mistakes. Everything looks good. Its materials are good. Nothing appears accidental. They launched that cryptocurrency move yesterday. That's sure to mobilize a ton more people on display. It's a very well-run campaign.
Absolutely. As a matter of execution, it looks buttered to the edge. It's very... very, very solid. And so when people that sort of were looking at this leadership 3-4 weeks ago and they were saying, okay, well, Poilievre has a lead now, but you have to take into consideration Charest's going to get in, Brown's going to get in, the field's going to get more crowded, those people are going to sell memberships. There was this implicit notion that the Poilievre campaign would be static, that its universe would be like, that there would be a lead galloped up on. I mean, to me, the external evidence, and I'm only going by that, and it can be misleading. The external evidence would suggest if there's a campaign that's active, that's on the rise, that's moving and signing up new members and expanding the base of the party, it's his campaign. And so to liberals, I say, and I said this before, start fucking now. Start now, because his campaign is buttered to the edge, and as a matter of execution, it's well done. But he is peddling a message of freedom. What the fuck does that mean, right? Poke on that. Figure out find the most vulnerable spots of it. Don't just dismiss it and go, oh, people, we already are free. You're a fucking dummy for thinking that. No, that's not the right response. Don't put people down. Figure out what makes people agree with you when you say, well, that's kind of bullshit, right? Like, that doesn't work, right? Like, that doesn't serve your interest, right? Find out what that bullseye is and start throwing arrows at it now. Don't wait until next September to start fighting this guy, because there is an intensity of his support. He is going to win this leadership, and he is going to show up at the next bar night with two blades gleaming and sharpened and ready to stick into you.
So for obvious reasons, another wave of Ukrainian immigrants is headed to Canada. Their reason for leaving Ukraine is tragic, but their arrival here is a very good thing for the country. Previous waves of humanity from Ukraine literally helped build and farm Western Canada. Talk about a contribution, and talk about a cultural force. Think former GG Reynatition, or former Supreme Court Justice John Sopinka. Think former Premiers Roy Romano, Gary Filmon, Ed Stelmach. Think William Shatner, Roberta Bondar, Randy Bachman. There have been enough Ukrainian-Canadian NHL players to form their own team. Gretzky, Eddie Shack, Terry Sawchuk, Mike Bossy, Vic Stasiak, and so many others. The size and distinctiveness of the Ukrainian-Canadian community, the biggest outside Russia and Ukraine itself, was a major reason for Canada's embrace of multiculturalism as an official national policy more than 50 years ago. Today, there are about 1.5 million Canadians who identify as Ukrainian. Many of them are here because their ancestors escaped repression and genocide. And now, once again, Ukrainians are fleeing their homeland for the same reason. Thousands have already arrived in Canada. Millions more are refugees in Europe. And they need help. Our sponsor, CN, has a long history with the Ukrainian-Canadian communities, particularly along its network in the Prairie provinces. Many of its pensioners, employees, and stakeholders here and in the United States are of Ukrainian descent. Those communities are deeply involved in humanitarian efforts now underway here and in Eastern Europe, and CN wanted to help. So the railway has donated $1.1 million to the Ukrainian-Canadian Foundation, as well to Raison, a sister organization in the U.S. The money will help pay for resettlement, shelter, and food, and for badly needed medical supplies within Ukraine. Further, CN has pledged to match donations made by its employees and pensioners. If you're like me, you've been watching the news from Ukraine with a feeling of helplessness. Well, you know how you can help? Money can help. Vast relief efforts are originating in Canada. There's no better cause. All right, let's move on to our clipping of the day, which relates back to the NDP Liberal arrangement, and it's from Susan Delacourt in the Globe and Mail. Susan, always tremendous source of inside information and what's going on and analysis around it. So let me just read a couple of segments from this. When Singh's baby girl arrived in early January, Trudeau placed a courtesy call that opened up discussions about a long-term cooperation deal with the NDP. By January 21st, each leader had assembled a small, very tight team to negotiate the details. On the Liberal side, it was Trudeau, his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, Senior Advisor Jeremy Broadhurst, and Policy Director John Broadhead. On the New Democrat side, it was Singh, his Chief of Staff Jennifer Howard, National Party Director Anne McGrath, and NDP Policy Director Jonathan Gauvin. If MPs on either side did catch wind of the leaders talking to each other, they were told this was consultation for the upcoming budget. Just one budget, not the four envisioned in this deal. What Trudeau had in mind, and also in the Liberal platform, was a progressive-leaning agenda that had to be built over the long term in several budgets. He also knew that some of the NDP's policy goals had a similar timeline. The Venn diagram had a big middle, a Liberal source said. New Democrats were struck by how much Trudeau had studied and analyzed their election platform for overlapping pieces. Broadly, the two parties believed they had the seeds of cooperation on four large themes: healthcare, housing affordability, climate change, and Indigenous reconciliation. Christy, what leaps out at that article from you?
Well, the surprise implicit in this, what? You guys agree with us on these issues? Why? I can't believe the Venn diagram has so much in common. Yes, the Liberals have been planning and slowly executing a complete takeover of the NDP for a long time. Congratulations on catching up with that, folks. And so, you know, what strikes me, I guess that's what strikes me about it. There's no surprise in it whatsoever. And when you look at these two leaders, both of them have lots of people in their party who are unhappy with them. Trudeau's probably worried about some of the guys on his flank inside his own cabinet who are, you know, we all know, talking about who's going to be the next leader, including Chrystia Freeland. And you've got Singh on the other side. Lots of people unhappy with his electoral failure over the years. Well, what better way to make sure that you don't have an election than get together and figure out, gee, what do you mean? We all believe in the same things because guess what? We're the same party. So let's be the same party in everything but name.
What would caucus expect its role in something like that, those discussions to be?
You know, I was working through this because we had some experience with this. I mean, when we did it in BC, it was the Green Party we were one seat short of a majority. The Green Party was negotiating with both parties to figure out which one they wanted to go with. They weren't really, though. They'd already decided they wanted to go. It was pretty performative. They decided they wanted to go with the New Democrats. But on our side, we went through that whole process and we kept the caucus up to date on what was going on in the negotiations and all that stuff. And the caucus's role for us was pretty important because we needed them to support us in what we were going to decide to do. You can't lose any votes when you're kind of two people up. But Trudeau doesn't even know the names of a lot of his caucus members that have sat with him for years and years. So I'm not sure that caucus plays the same role for Trudeau. And I don't know, I don't have any insight to what happens with the NDP caucus. I was surprised that it seemed to go through, they all swallowed it like it was butter.
They're very quiet.
Melting in their mouths. Yeah.
They're very quiet.
First the Emergency Powers Act support, which I was totally shocked and many New Democrats were shocked by. And now this, I have to assume that in the NDP, there's going to be some disagreement with this because, some of them must realize this is political suicide for them and their party.
Scott, what do you think of this process that Susan outlined?
So, I got a bunch of thoughts about this. And I'm going to go super deep, super wanky nerd practitioner, because this is what we call a Tick-tock story. And I'm picking up our buddy Bill Fox's new book. David, you had Bill on the pod the other day. He talks about this in his book. He talked about it with you on the pod, this notion of a Tick-tock story. This is a Tick-tock story, right? And a Tick-tock story is take us behind the scenes, tell us how this unfolded, Tick-tock, like a clock, like a stopwatch, what was the real-time thing, what happened in what order, and all those sort of stuff. And, you and Bill talked about the advantages of these stories in terms of their entertainment for us to follow, right? And also their dangers in terms of putting them together. And because a Tick-tock story is by definition reliant upon the sources you have. So two things about this as a Tick-tock story. One, it's a really good example of a Tick-tock story. And it should be. Susan Delacour's been doing this a long time. She knows how to write these things. She super knows how to write these things. And it's a wickedly entertaining read, right? Like you find yourself, there's no I put it down and went and had a coffee. You finish the goddamn article, right? You read the whole thing if you're a political junkie. The second thing I would say is that if this is in any microcosm way an indication of how the NDP Liberal Alliance is going to work, then the Liberals are running circles around them. Because a Tick-tock story is defined by who says what about what? How do you write your own history in real time in that newspaper? And this looks to me like the NDP took a pass in participating or did the very lightest brush. This looks like it was written very well by the Liberals, and I mean very well by them. And I'm going to give you two precise examples, right? One, there is a passage in the middle of this story, right, that as a practitioner, I red circled it and said, someone is doing their job well. Someone on the Liberal side is really crackerjacking their job. So they talk about how the Prime Minister was supposed to meet with Singh and he had to text his family saying, sorry, I can't make it. I know this meeting was only supposed to be 1 hour. It's gone on to 3 hours. But quote unquote in my text, I'm just having so much fun. This is, if you think about it, the most cliched story you've ever heard in the world, right? Oh, the two leaders were only supposed to meet for 45 minutes, but after an hour and a half, we knew there was real chemistry and blah, 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 blah. You've heard that a million times at leader summits. You've heard that at merger talks between two CEOs all the time. This story, right?
It's the addition of the quote.
But it's the addition of the quote. They put an unlay-offable button. So if you are ever, as a practitioner out there, if you're a DCOMS or a press secretary somewhere out there and you're wondering, how do I get my perspective jammed straight into the middle of this Tick-tock in a defining way? Use a colorful unlay-offable quote like this, that I'm having so much fun. It absolutely powers the piece, right? So really good tactical work on the part of whoever's spinning this yarn for the Liberals. The second thing is, the whole thing is embroidered around, well, why did we have to do this? So you've got to answer the question of why did you do this in a way that is flattering to you, in a way that makes you look smart, farsighted, in a way that implicitly says, fuck off, Reid and Herle, you guys don't even know what you're talking about. You're 6 moves behind me on the chessboard. And, one of the anchoring rationales is captured toward the end, where they report out that one of the after great deal of thought, the Prime Minister came to this reluctantly after great consideration, but really thinking about it, it was looking to the south and looking to the threat that conservatives pose and the far right poses and the way in which they're conducting themselves. And if we don't align ourselves against that, you take a look at the way in which they are and explicitly root the idea. They're using their power, the conservative and right movement in the United States, to disenfranchise people, to tilt the playing board. And so we got to preclude that before it happens here. That might be a threat. Therefore, we move together, we preclude them. It goes back to what you were saying earlier, David, which is that, this is in part, they're saying that the motivation of this and the feedback you were getting was, no, we have to stop these other sons of bitches. We got to stop the Poilievres who are bringing together what's left of the trucker convoy and all the other angry people. We got to stop those guys. Otherwise, they're going to strip our ability to vote and stop. So it's a smart anchoring. So all of this is, and I know I'm being really antiseptic and talking about it without any sort of value-laden judgment, but as a Tick-tock piece, both Susan's construction of it and the people who are working behind the scene to write this thing and drive this narrative, it is a fucking masterclass. So pay attention if you're ever interested in how to put together a Tick-tock, whether as a journalist or as a behind-the-scenes source, because whoever took the handle on this thing and drove the story did a great job. And as far as I could tell, the NDP might have just been in the business of confirming who attended what meeting, but I see no evidence of their touch and their narrative in here.
Okay. All right. Hey, out there close to where you are, Christy, out there in Alberta, politics is a fucking crazy now.
Yep.
It's gone absolutely crazy. So Jason Kenney canceled the leadership review vote in Red Deer because 15,000 people had registered to pay $99 to go to Red Deer to vote in the leadership review. Now, I'm pretty proud of the organization we put together for John Turner in 1986 to fight the leadership review. And we were a pretty good team. But, if we'd found out that 15,000 people were coming to Ottawa to vote for the leadership review, might have had to second guess things. I mean, at what point do you fucking quit, Christy? I mean, Jesus.
Yeah.
15,000 people were prepared to come and vote in the leadership review.
I know. Their beginning mistake was they didn't freeze the membership list when they called the vote. That's what they should have done. I mean, it was just... I don't know how that happened, but that's what happened. And so, because it's easy to sell memberships to get rid of somebody. And in a province like Alberta, where you've got lots of people who are who are anti-vaxxers and people who are highly motivated, they are paying the price for that now. So, I mean, to your question though, at what point do you quit? I hope he doesn't. Because, and I know the national media and everybody likes to kick Jason Kenney around, but he has governed like a centrist, like most people do, or, when they get into government. His rhetoric hasn't been center, and it hasn't been kind of easy to swallow for a lot of people or easy to hear. But boy, Canada needs Alberta. Like, we need Alberta to function and to do well.
Yeah, but Christy, the guy's in his first term. Like, what's happened to him?
Well,
he's in his first term.
He took over a party and brought all of the crazy people in, and he didn't get rid of them. And that was I think he decided that he was good enough, big enough, smart enough to be able to manage all of these crazy people. I mean, what I did when I took over after Gordon Campbell is we spent 2 years with some of those folks, and then we didn't let them run again. Now, he had an election and got elected, and he let lots of those people run for him. And that's been his problem. I don't think, though, any of us should be hoping that Jason Kenney gets defeated in this thing. We should all be hoping, whatever our political views, that he survives this, because we do need, as a country, Alberta to succeed. We need it. And it's not going to succeed with Brian Jean.
Jean-Briand.
I don't know what question Brian Jean is the answer to. But it isn't what.
He's not John Major. He's Michael Heseltine. So, really, I mean, he's not going to emerge from this as the guy with the roses around his neck. It's going to be somebody else. But I got two thoughts on this. One, I like it. Okay, I like it for this reason, right? And, I like watching this happen. As you said, Christy, he's sort of governed in the center, even if his rhetoric was to the right. Well, good fucking on you then, because this is, and the Pierre Poilievre campaign can pay attention to this, and those that are celebrating and clapping those crowds that we're talking about keep this in mind, because this may be a cautionary tale and a preview of your future. Because when you tell people, when you build your political foundation in your success around a message of don't trust government, they're bullshitters, don't trust institutions, they're just out to fuck you, and you use that as a mechanism to propel you into power, and then you find yourself in power with the obligation of actually being responsible, the dissonance between the rhetoric that you've employed, the bill of goods you've sold voters, and the way in which you conduct yourself once in power, that is going to harm you. It is, in reverse, it's kind of the way in which Aaron O'Toole found himself, that so many critics from Polyev hammer against him. Well, like, hey, man, you told us you were going to burn the village down. Now you're here and you're telling us to wear masks and you can't go to a restaurant. And what the fuck? I thought it was all about telling government to fly a kite. Now you're telling me that you are government and I have to not do what I want to do. Who the fuck is Jason Kenney and what did he turn into? So I like this. I like watching people run into the limits of their own rhetoric and horseshit. And I hope people are paying close attention. The second thing is, as a political practitioner, doesn't Kenney need to stop this before the review weekend happens? I know that he's created new mail-in ballots and, you know, and we got different voting centers and all that. And that people say it's going to tip the scales. I can't pretend to be an expert in that, but it looks to me like he is in a real deep hole. He's down the well here. He can't afford to lose that vote. I think he's got to pull the plug on himself prior to that weekend and say, listen, we need to have, let's just clear this air. You know what? A leadership review with a murky outcome would be the last thing that we need in Alberta. We're too close to the next election. We can't have the NDP take power. We have too much to do in terms of this recovery. I'm going to call a leadership convention. I will be a candidate at that leadership convention. We will throw down and it will be winner take all, and then we'll settle this motherfucking question. Because I think the odds of that contest are better for him than the odds of this contest. If he loses this thing and loses badly, he could be Tom Mulcahy. He may not have the option of competing in a future leadership contest. And I think I'm watching to see if he pulls the plug on his own bathtub.
I don't think he will. I think they believe that they're going to win this when they get to the, if you're,
but if they win with 58, is that a win? Like, you know what I mean? Like, don't you have to win with 70?
Well, no, really? No.
The lunatics are taking over the asylum.
Yeah.
Stroke of genius or last straw.
50% plus one, he wins. That's the way it's going to work. And that's all they're going to need to do it.
This gambit that he pulled where he gave this speech and leaked it, in which he called out the extreme elements of his party, the fringe elements, referred to them as bugs attracted to light. The lunatics are taking over the asylum. I mean, Hillary Clinton never thought of ways like this to describe these people. So is that the external enemy that he needed to fight to galvanize his people? Or is that the last straw of his leadership? Of that?
He needed to do that. And I think it must have been deliberate. I mean, the words were very deliberately chosen to make sure that he was calling on all of the moderate conservatives, which is most people in Alberta, to get out and vote and to really motivate them to kind of talk about who's out there. And, this really is a moment for Jason, which is where and he did a really good interview with radio, on radio a couple of days ago, where he's really starting to sound like a normal, middle of the road conservative, a much more moderate, thoughtful person. This could be a moment. I mean, hopefully it's a period of great growth for him as a leader, realizing that, as Scott said, I mean, I don't agree with most of what Scott said, but the part about falling on your, being foisted on your own petard because you are, you're using the wrong language and you're sounding too hard is good advice for Jason. And I think he's taking it now. So I don't know. I think he's going to win. I think it's not going to be, it probably won't be a huge number that he wins by. He'll stick around. Money's flowing into the budget. They've cut government spending vastly. They've done a great job on cutting the growth of government. The budget's going to continue to grow. Alberta's going to be back in the black. And I think people are going to vote for him in the election because in Alberta, that really matters. The money.
I don't for 1 second. I'll
bet you $20 on the Alberta election.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I say not, Lee. Easy.
Okay.
Me too.
Okay. $20.
And I think one of the reasons is that he may try to go through this leadership review without calling a leadership on himself. Because I think 50% plus one at a leadership review is a ridiculous notion. It simply doesn't work. The intensity of these people, as we've talked about, people that he just smeared, and you were denouncing it when Trudeau did it, and now you're celebrating it as a strategic move. I don't think it's a strategic move. I think this guy's going down like a blind roofer. I think he knows it. I think it's the kind of thing that happens when you're losing. I think he was frustrated and the tape leaked out. I don't see how it possibly helps him. It's too late to try to galvanize and recruit new voters. So it's obviously just him feeling the goddamn pressure. And if he thinks that he can win this thing with 53%,
well, it's not too late. I think they've extended the vote all the way to May now.
Yeah, and Scott, it's not fair to say, it's not true to say that it's the same thing that Trudeau did. It was
worse in terms of the characterization of people.
Read what he said. What he said was specifically, we are talking about people who are demonizing Muslims, who are demonizing Jews, who are out there and they believe that I'm a murderer, trafficking a child. Like, he was very specific about the things that people have said. The individuals have said. He wasn't talking about kind of a whole mass of people.
Christy, that is a contextualization and an elaboration that you do not permit and grant the Prime Minister. Come on. You know how this thing has been characterized and received, and it's been received as hammering those folks on the right, the far right, as lunatics. And, if it's bad for the Prime Minister, it's bad for Jason.
Not everybody in the trucker convoy could be considered on the far right.
I didn't say it. Jason did.
All right. Because we're running out of time.
I can't
Finally getting you pissed off at me. I hate Reid, she thinks.
Yeah.
Because we're running out of time.
Scott,
I'm going to put... Everybody hates Scott. Scott, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're in a bar.
Yeah. Okay. I can't imagine such a thing.
You're with me.
Okay.
You're Stephen Del Duca.
Right.
You're not Scott Reid. You are Stephen Del Duca.
Okay.
Tell me what you think of the childcare deal with Ontario.
I drink heavily before I turn to you and peer at you through my lasered eyes, because I no longer am wearing those gigantic underwater sea goggles. And I say, David, I don't think it's going to actually matter that much. I don't think that at the end of the day, I think the election's going to be fought on the following other issues. And I think we're in good, strong shape. And once the campaign starts, the first 6-7 days, you're going to see the incumbent drops. They always do. Then we're going to be in a foot race. And I'll say all that shit. And here's what you will say, David, after you return from smoking weed outside of the bar. And you're like, oh, I'm sorry, Stephen, are you still talking? I think you will say, dude, Ford has put himself in a position where he demonstrates that he can't be demonized as somebody that's indifferent to these things. He's building EV plants. He's raising the minimum wage. He's working with the Prime Minister to build healthcare, childcare. He's less vulnerable than he was in the last election, if anything, on being attacked as a potential devourer of worlds when it comes to those things. And he also can sort of brandish himself about as a guy that, is able to work with other levels of government. None of that means that it turns the election, but all of it as a matter prima facie fact undermines you, harms you, and it's made it tougher, not easier for you. And he will have another drink, and then he'll walk out of the bar mumbling, I never liked Herle anyway.
But don't federal Liberals always try and hope that there's a Conservative government in Ontario? It is the history of that is pretty strong. If there's a provincial Liberal government in Ontario, it's not as good for federal Liberals. I remember Kathleen Wynne's folks saying how disappointed they were that the federal Liberals didn't lift a finger to try and help her in her election after she was incredibly generous to the Prime Minister in her words and deeds when she was the Premier.
So, Christy, tell us how government to government works. So the Ford people string the feds along for months and months and months after everybody else has signed, and it's evidently they're stringing them along because there's no difference in this package from what anybody else got. So they're stringing them along until their election. Tell me why it's an unreasonable response for the federal government to say, once you get to, say, March or April, to say, well, actually, we'll check back with you after the election in July.
Well, I think they obviously they were doing it for their own election timing, but I mean, the feds need this childcare in Ontario, the childcare program in Ontario to work because that's their vote-rich area where they need support. So Ontario is in a unique position in the country because they're able to hold out on some of those deals with the feds and make it work for them. I would, for other provinces, the feds aren't quite so understanding about other people's timelines because they don't need the votes in those provinces as much. But when it comes to a childcare deal, the feds will generally, with other provinces, say, well, look, you need to do this now. And here's the other thing that we want from you if you want to be able to get this money. Ontario's kind of in the catbird seat on these kinds of deals. So good for Ford. I mean, he's been a fairly non-ideological leader, as you pointed out. And this is going to be very popular with his base. And again, I don't think Trudeau gives a flying about the Ontario Liberals. And I don't think most federal Liberal leaders ever really have about the provincial Liberals in Ontario.
Why though, is it in the political interest of Ford and Trudeau to be seen to be so chummy? It's not just that they did the deal together. It's that the way they talk about each other.
Because it's those 905 voters, isn't it, David? I mean, you know more about this than I do. I'm told that there's all these weird votes that come out of provincial Conservatives who vote for the federal Liberals.
I really agree with that, Christy. Like, I think forget about what you want to do. It's what you want to avoid if you're a Conservative in Ontario. And I think the number one thing you want to avoid if you're a Conservative in Ontario is scaring suburban women, scaring the women of the 905. And I think one of the ways that you insulate yourself from that characterization is to be seen to be working on this kind of issue set, working across the aisle, working across levels of government. It isn't necessarily even if, like, do those same suburban ones absolutely are they going to vote for or did vote for Trudeau? It's just that it just moves you on the political spectrum to a place where you don't seem alienating and scary to those women voters in the 905. And I think almost a precondition for success is that you tick that box if you're a Conservative leader in Ontario. Don't let yourself make that voter cohort afraid, because if you do, you're probably going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but this calculation has changed. I mean, at the beginning, I think that Trudeau ran against, if I'm remembering correctly, Trudeau used Ford as a foil in the 2019 campaign. And early in his tenure, Ford was on the cover of Maclean's as part of the resistance. So their political calculus here has clearly changed. And the difference in positioning between the Ontario Conservatives and the National Conservatives is becoming gapingly wide.
Yeah, well, their self-interest has shifted. And I think that their self-interest has shifted. And
I think there is a difference between governing parties and non-governing parties as well. I do think that once you're in government, your self-interest, as Scott says, it becomes clearer because you're the one in charge. You need to get things done. You can't just complain about things. So I think that shapes premiers' behavior quite significantly the longer that they're there. You just become, this is why most governments start to look kind of similar over, from various different political stripes the longer that they've been there, because government is all about the money. And it's, your vote universe is always changing, and you want to, it's just the realities of being there for a long, long time, which Ford, good for him. Looks like he's got another term coming up.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Who feels like going first with their Hey You?
Hey you, Conservatives in Alberta, get your shit together. Make sure that we end up with you get that vote done and get on with it, because Canada cannot do without a strong economy in Alberta. It pays for our healthcare across this country. And if you guys keep acting up, I think we're facing a lot of doom and trouble.
All right. My Hey You goes out to Rachel Notley. Rachel.
Man, Alberta-centric today.
Rachel, If you are on Twitter, get off it. If you read the Globe and the Star, stop it. If you listen to Curse of Politics, stop it. You're so close to winning, and I've never cheered for a New Democrat so hard in my life. You're so close to winning. Don't be distracted by whatever any central Canadian progressives want you to be or do. Stay focused on Alberta. Stay connected to Alberta, and this thing is going to be yours in a matter of time, and it will be great for the Federation. So stay focused, Rachel. It's almost there.
It's cool. Wait, but if she's not supposed to listen to your advice, then that would mean that she would not listen to your advice to stay focused. She'd become unfocused. This is like that episode of Star Trek where Kirk uses logic to blow up the computer. I think you've got me absolutely crisscrossed. My hey you is to Paul Martin, Ken Dryden.
That, by the way, was an amazing fucking episode when
it's fantastic.
Kirk talks the computer into a logical inconsistency and it blows itself up. That was genius.
Exactly. Hold my beer, Spock. My hey you goes out to Paul Martin, my old boss, Ken Dryden, my old friend. This week we had we saw the completion of this National Child Care Agreement, and now it's locked in Ontario, it's locked in everywhere. Our friend Ellie Albom said online earlier this week, David, that we too often treat something like it's just another news event. This is not just another news event. And set aside the electoral politics. You and I have discussed that before, but what it does and what it doesn't give you. But this is manifestly the right policy. If there is such a thing as a silver bullet, it is education, and early education in childcare is the silverest of silver bullets, right? We know what it does. It gets women into the workforce. It raises GDP. It gives an improved education down the road and healthier younger people. It is good for the economy. It is good for social structures. It is good for social cohesion and communities. It is good for families. It is a silver bullet. The other day, I was hosting radio here in Toronto, and we were talking about the deal. The last call of the day, we were talking online, opened it up. Like, you remember those days when you were hosting online radio, Christy? And a caller came in, and he just said, listen, I just want to say, 20 years ago, I was in an event that Ken Dryden led, building the child care system. I saw the leadership that Ken provided. I saw the leadership that Paul Martin provided. And today I see that vision finally completed. And he said, I'm just really excited. And I hope the people give the nod to those guys. Chrystia Freeland did yesterday in that Ontario Newser. She gave a nod to Paul. She gave a nod to Ken. And I just think it's really important.
All right. Love the two of you. Thank you for joining us again this morning. This was so much fun. Perhaps a little less controversial than last week. I don't know. You never know. You never know with this show. Anyway, I would like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsor, CN Rail. I would like to thank everybody who listened to the show or watched the show today. And, of course, I'd like to thank Cole Caulfield for obvious reasons. So, till next week, everybody, Curse of Politics.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.